It's Tuesday, October the 17th, 2023. And let us gather together and experience the goodness of God. I'm Pastor Trey Comstock. We'll begin this week with our scripture, Exodus chapter 32, verses 1 through 14, and a piece by me entitled High in the Desert. Then Pastor Emily Larson and I will talk scripture and stories of nuns from around the world. But first, a reading from Exodus chapter 32, verses 1 through 14. When the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people gathered around Aaron and said to him, "Come, make gods for us, who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." Aaron said to them, "Take off the gold rings that are on the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me." So all the people took off the gold rings from their ears and brought them to Aaron. He took the gold from them, formed it into a mold, and cast an image of a calf. And they said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it. And Aaron made proclamation and said, "Tomorrow shall be a festival to the Lord." They rose early the next day and offered burnt offerings and brought sacrifices of well-being. And the people sat down to eat, drink, and rose up to revel. The Lord said to Moses, "Go down at once. Your people, whom you brought out of the land of Egypt, have acted perversely. They have been quick to turn aside from the way that I commanded them. They have cast for themselves an image of a calf, and have worshipped it, and sacrificed to it, and said, 'These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt.'" The Lord said to Moses, "I have seen this people, how stiff-necked they are. Now let me alone, so that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them, and of you I will make a great nation." But Moses implored the Lord his God, and said, "O Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against your people, whom you brought out of the land of Egypt, with great power and with a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say, 'It was with evil intent that he brought them out to kill them in the mountains, and to consume them from the face of the earth'? Turn your fierce wrath, change your mind, and do not bring disaster on your people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants, how you swore to them by your own self, saying, 'I will multiply your descendants like the stars of heaven, and all this land that I have promised I will give your descendants, and they shall inherit it forever.' And the Lord changed his mind about the disaster that he planned to bring on his people. When I was 19, the woman that I was dating at the time threatened to steal my watch. She felt like I spent all our time together checking said watch and worrying about arriving late to my next thing. This probably should have told both of us something about the state of that particular relationship, but looking back, she captured something about my character at that moment in my life. I spent up to 20 hours per day in a hurry, and my reaction to her criticism also captured something telling. I didn't get what she was so worried about. I had a run from the age of 18 to the age of 30 where my work-life balance didn't exist. I rushed from place to place. I failed to balance a college prep high school, undergrad, and 6 years of graduate school with a heavy extracurricular load, jobs, and a personal life. I still work and rush too much. The day before I wrote this piece, I was up for over 20 hours, working all but 2 of them. However, the real height of my workaholism came in that 12-year stretch. High school, college, teaching, grad school, international missions, and founding a church. When that run ended, I moved to be a solo pastor in Lexington, Texas, and I looked back at that period with the regrets of an addict. The human brain can be a surprisingly simple machine at times. It doesn't differentiate causes of stress. Stress is stress. The human endocrine system sees no difference between a hyper-programmed 20-something and running from a lion. I essentially spent that entire season of my life high on adrenaline and cortisol. My lifestyle deliberately flooded my system with those hormones, and I lived in that perpetual state of tunnel vision that they invoke. Any good 12-step program includes a piece where you apologize to those whom you harmed through your addiction. Looking back at my late teens and 20s, now no longer living so high on stress, I comprehend the wreckage, failed relationships, unfulfilled responsibilities, missed opportunities, and the overwhelming sense that if I could have done a smaller number of things far better. If I hadn't rushed, if I took my time, I would have treated people better, accomplished less, and maybe found greater peace. The story of the golden calf is about idolatry, an idolatry born of impatience, of being in a rush. When the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, people gathered around Aaron and said, "Come, make gods for us, who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." Aaron said to them, "Take off the gold rings that are on the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me." Exodus chapter 32, verses 1 through 2. Moses goes up the mountain to receive God's law. How long did it take? However long it takes for the finger of God and the voice of God to dictate 11 chapters of Exodus. The people, including Moses' brother and right-hand man, disliked the lack of immediacy and rushed to make their own item for worship. At this point, we usually start dunking on them. After all that God has done, how could they give up so quickly? They saw the party of the Red Sea. Moses leaves their sight for a little while and they lose the script entirely? We marvel at their failure or simply use this scene as emblematic of humans' innate idolatrousness. One can sum up this entire cycle of Exodus with people cry out, wondering where God is, God moves, the people praise God, the people cry out, wondering where God is. Out there in the wilderness, far from civilization, with nothing but desert and mountains as far as the eye can see, the Hebrew people didn't exactly live in comfort and peace. They lived as slaves. They fled. They got attacked by the Egyptian army. They watched God beat them back in a truly dramatic show of power. From there, they moved constantly, day after day, month after month, with no homes but their tents and no food except what fell from heaven. The trauma of their previous life and escape and the strain of constant movement in hostile terrain left them with huge amounts of stress and adrenaline. Moses' delay found them at a moment of weakness, not one of strength. They too were high on stress. And believe me, one doesn't always make the best choices in that situation. I don't want to create an excuse that you can do whatever you want and blame it on being high at the time. Got caught in idolatry? It's okay, I was high. No. Instead, I wonder how the increasingly overstuffed nature of modern life impacts the human soul. I approach this as perhaps the chief among sinners in this regard. I see it even in the life of my own family. We managed to avoid major kid activities for the first 7 years of our son's life, but now the shuttle service from Scouts to choir to run club operates in full force every week. No one has time. Work, kids, family, whatever, pulls us from place to place to place. The combo can kill us, mind, body, and soul. In that perpetual state, it can be hard to summon the patience to wait on the Lord, and far easier to offer up our own expedient. For me to end this by saying, "Slow down," would constitute hypocrisy in the extreme and serves no one. We cannot withdraw from this world. Bills have to get paid. Kids have to get to soccer. Aging parents need care. I merely want us all to know the spiritual risks that our world creates for us. Maybe, despite our run-and-gun way of life, we can see God through the miasma of stress. So, as you just heard in the piece, and for once, the piece I wrote in the sermon more or less have the same exact message. It just took two different angles on it, but it was all about, like, this. And I also recognize this is not a normal path to take on the story of the golden calf. I just feel like yelling about idolatry is at least a played out, like we've been doing it
Has
for
been done before.
we've
I
been doing
liked your unique perspectives this time around.
We've
It
been
was
doing that
interesting.
for 3,000 years. It's 3,000 years of reflections on the golden calf that boil down to idolatry, bad. And so I feel like we've internalized idolatry, bad. And now let's start to get to what leads to idolatry other than human bad, right? Because
Right.
that's the other piece of it, like, okay, well, I was a special ed teacher, and so one of the things they teach you when you're training to be a special ed teacher that you do ABA, you do applied behavior stuff,
Mhm.
where like you approach every situation to not student bad, therefore student do bad thing. That's not great, and also not how humans work. It is what's motivating that behavior. That all human behavior comes from somewhere, right? We like these like images of like sociopaths who are just nuts, and like sociopaths exist, but sociopathy is shockingly rare in the human species. 99.999% of people have empathy, um, have fall within a reasonable range of morality. So then, where does this behavior come from? And also, like, we like to think of ourselves as like, or maybe you don't. I do. I like to think of myself as a calm, stoic individual, right? This is there's a meme that's been going around the internet that was like, how often do men think about the Roman Empire? I have a weird problem with that. I do think about the Roman Empire a lot professionally, right? Like, I
I mean, it does. There's an overlap in our,
I mean, the New Testament is written
profession.
under the Roman Empire, right? So,
This is
like,
true.
I do think about the Roman Empire, maybe not on a daily basis, but on a weekly basis. If I'm not thinking about the Roman Empire, I mean, I talked about the Roman Empire in Bible study today because we were like, we had a question like tracing the history of. We actually did the separation of the two kingdoms, which is really
Ugh,
interesting when there's a war in Gaza. And so we kind of traced
right.
the history, and so we guess what? We talked about the Romans. But anyway, like, I have a little bit of that. I love to think of myself as a calm, stoic individual. But the truth is, like, the human endocrine system can be wildly unsophisticated, right? Like, there's only like 4 levers it can pull. And so when you're really stressed, you're really stressed. My refrain for both the piece and the sermon is, it does not understand. Your body doesn't know the difference between being late to soccer practice and running from a lion.
Right.
And so our friends, the Hebrews, they're in the desert, traumatized as all get out, right? And also they're traumatized. They've been slaves. They've been chased by the Egyptian army, which I get that like they got away, but like, come on.
Still a traumatic event. Crossing a Red Sea, still a terrifying event. Or crossing the sea, still terrifying. All of the things they had been through were still very terrifying. It's really easy for us to look at it in hindsight
Yeah.
and know that Moses was on the mountain, know that Moses
Well,
was talking to God, and to go, it's going to be fine for them. And they panicked for no reason. But we weren't there. We didn't experience that.
this is
So,
every documentary. Okay. I watch a lot of strange documentaries, right? And I have, a few genres that I spend a lot of time with. Obviously, true crime. I too am a millennial white person, and so I watch a lot of. It's usually millennial white women, I admit, but I watch. I am the person driving our watching true crime documentaries in our household. I watch a lot of cult documentaries because that feels of professional interest. I watch a lot of like weird sports documentaries. I don't watch a lot of things other than baseball. The Astros looking real bad at the moment. But and then I watch a lot of like disasters after the fact documentaries. So like, about plane crashes and wildfires and whatever. And it's really easy when you watch those things. And in some ways that's Exodus, right? Exodus is just like this part of Exodus is just the documentary after the fact of
after the disaster.
after the disaster to really look at them and go, well, obviously, da 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 da, right? But when like the wildfire is moving at 100 miles an hour, literally, and that's a thing that can happen, right? When the winds get really going in California, like you're gonna make dumb decisions, right? Like when you think or like the thing with the Boeing planes, like when the sensors are lying to you, right? Like it's really easy to screw that up, right?
Yeah.
And so this feels that way, right? When like do they make their own decision? Yeah, they absolutely do, and we should not take the excuse of I did it because I was high, right? But like they this comes from like a deeply like traumatized and then stressed. You're living in the wilderness. The guy guiding you through said you're packing up, tearing down all the time. We don't know how long they stayed in any one place, but they're living that road life in an inhospitable desert.
And they
And
didn't know how long it would be if
right,
Moses would come back, right?
right.
That's understandable if you look at it from that point of view. It's just real easy for us to judge because we're sitting in a seat of judgment in the future, but they didn't know.
They didn't know, and so that's why I want to take the tack of like the old commercial, like this is your brain on drugs, and it's an egg, and then
And
the
you
guy
smash it.
smashes the egg,
Yep.
right? Like we too live in a high baseline stress environment. I kind of, put the focus on me because I really, I did a really thoroughly good job of letting, my workaholic tendencies wreck my life. I left out even like the horrors it wrought on my physical body, right? Like I was not at the end of that season. I was not a healthy individual, in and by any sense of the term, right? And so maybe I took it to an extreme, but I am hard pressed to find a modern person in modern American life. Certainly, if they're working in the period where they've got kids at home and are working, that isn't stressed to the nines.
Right.
And that's not healthy. But also is in some ways not entirely escapable.
It is the culture that we live in now. It is, we've talked on this show before about it is the social media culture that
Yeah.
we live in. It's that fear of missing out. It's that higher level of expectation that we put on each other because, we see the Instagram perfect
Well,
house or life or job or car or family or whatever.
but even beyond that, right? Like we were talking in the pre-show, which I realize will probably not end up in this show, but we're talking in the pre-show about that, like the concept that appliances were supposed to set us free, right?
Mm-hmm.
That like the advent of the washing machine, the advent of the dryer, the advent of the dishwasher was supposed to liberate women, right? Because back before those modern conveniences, women nose to the literal grindstone, right? Because it was the only way to make flour, right? And then we get
Mm-hmm.
all these conveniences, and then what happened instead of like women experience liberation because of that, you end up with 1950s domesticity, which just meant, oh, well, now you can, because you have these machines, now one person without help can just achieve absolute perfection and do it in heels.
Uh-huh.
Um, and like,
Can vacuum in pearls now because
right.
your
It's
workload
not
is
going to
so
make you
much better.
sweat.
Correct.
And everyone can be perfect, and everyone can always have perfect hair, and
And
all
have
of
dinner
that.
on the table by 5 and honey,
Right.
I'm home. Right.
Uh huh.
Exactly.
And so smartphones did a similar thing to work, right? So you used to have to go to work. Emily, do you go to work? I'm
um,
not calling you out. You work for this church, but like, do you
in
go
this
to work? Yeah,
box
right.
right
No,
here, if
exactly.
you're watching the visual
Uh huh.
show,
Uh huh.
yeah. If you're listening to the podcast, no,
You don't
I
go to
am a
work.
voice in a box. I
You're a
don't
voice.
go to an office.
Right. And so smartphones and this kind of modern infotech did the similar thing to work, right? Now, you don't need to go to an office. You can
Right.
just be available all of the time.
All
And
the
so
time. You never have to unplug.
you never
Anybody can get in contact with you any hour of the
uh-huh.
day.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
There are actually laws in France. This is true. There are laws in France like saying that bosses can't email you outside of these hours.
That's
Because
incredible.
because your availability to work just went up. And it's all well
Right.
and good to say, well, don't answer. Well, but if not answering results in you losing your job,
Right.
like, or your job performance being negatively whatever, like at
Right.
some point, some of the stuff we do to ourselves, the social media stuff we do to ourselves. Guess what?
Right.
You don't have to, if you're watching this on TikTok, hi, but like, you don't actually have to be on TikTok, right?
Right. You don't actually have to be perfect on TikTok.
You don't
all
actually
the
be
time.
perfect on TikTok or anywhere else. Like, that is a thing we
Right.
do to ourselves. But the nature of modern work, like,
Right.
some of it, like,
That it never stops. That your availability should be 24/7.
for 7, that like
Mm-hmm.
you can just, these are the standards you have to achieve, and go for it, right? It's not even on the like interpersonal level, it's not enough to just serve someone your food. You got to serve someone their food with a smile on your face. You have to maintain that smile even when they're huge jerks to you, right?
Right.
My wife's the special ed teacher, which is a particular kind of trap, where we have a lot of conversations in our family. The job is literally not possible, right? Because there's all these legal expectations and then not the funding to achieve them, right? So you've got to meet these expectations because they're the law, right? And legalities and school district funding and all this stuff gets wrapped up, and you have to meet your special ed targets. And F. Mike Miles, who has a special ed plan that isn't for HISD, like, oh, we're gonna meet the targets, and I'm like,
That isn't. That's a good way. He has a plan that is
that
not.
isn't.
Yeah.
Right, like, and so it's just another one of those like traps. And so it's all well and good for me to look at my spouse and go, you should be calmer and live more at peace. Like, okay, sure, not in this economy.
Right. Can't afford to live in peace in this economy.
Right,
Literally.
and so that's where like I want to approach. That's the angle I've been approaching the scripture with, of like, okay, I cannot be the one to tell you, go and be at peace. I'm a chronic workaholic. I am a chronic workaholic. I have to work every day to make sure that my workaholism does not negatively impact my family too bad. But I definitely last Wednesday got home on Thursday, right? I got to my hotel room at 2:30 in the morning last Wednesday, after having worked a full from. I started working at 10 a.m. on Tuesday, and I went to bed and stopped working at 2:30 a.m. Wednesday, right? That's when I got to my hotel. I got to my hotel at 2 a.m. I went to bed at 2:30. Right, so I'm a chronic workaholic. And so, like, I am not the one to tell you, go and be at peace, my brother.
Or achieve work-life balance.
I don't
That's
know
my favorite. Yeah. What is work and life balance? When you're available 24/7. When you can't just turn it off.
Well, right. And, like, our job is uniquely weird about that because, like, and this is where, like, what work-life balance I have achieved is when I just expanded the strike zone, right? Like, I changed what was normal working hours, and so I don't work 9 to 5 because almost no one needs me at 9 a.m. And
but everybody needs you after 5 o'clock.
Everyone needs you after 5 p.m.
From their 9 to 5.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, so even in this job, right, like, I have 2 nights a week reliably where I am interacting with students of some form. So I'm interacting with middle school and high school students on Tuesday evenings and college students on Thursday evenings, right? Like, those students don't need me at 9 a.m. They're in school. Or in college students still asleep.
Right.
Not at their
That's work-life balance right there. Yeah, stay asleep when you can.
I was, if I had an 8 a.m., I say this sounds like I'm a place of judgment of college students. I was a college student for 10 years. I really tried to limit my 8 a.m. classes because it's not happening. Right. But, like, so I just, like, do I get into work at 9 a.m.? Not unless I have a thing. I get into work between 10 and 11. Or I start working at home and then come in when it makes sense. Right. To achieve a modicum of balance.
Even weekends. Weekends are funerals and weddings and football games and emergency surgeries and hospital visits. And, you can't, we work on Sundays. We don't have Sabbath on Sundays. We work on Sunday.
No, and so I try, when we do, someday we'll do one of the, a sermon on Sabbath. And, like, I have developed a Sabbath practice. It took a really long time. But I cook for my friends on Fridays. Fridays is my Sabbath. That's why it's all, I talk about this in the show a lot. That's why it's me and the stressed out Jewish dads on Friday evening, because I also begin my Sabbath on Fridays by cooking, and having our own Sabbath dinner. We
Yes.
call it family dinner, but it's the same concept, right? So like I say all of this, to say like none of us are running at our best,
Right.
right? And and a lot of that is not self-manufactured. Some of it is hustle culture, right? I think I tagged in the essay version of this. I tagged hustle culture as one of the tags, and I would love to
Right.
see, because this is literally like hustle culture bad for you, right? Bad for your like mind, body, and soul, right? Hustle culture is being high all the time. Hustle
Right.
culture is intentionally giving yourself an addiction, right? As someone who is like rose and grinded for longer than most 37-year-olds, because I started when I was 16. It's a sickness. Don't do it. 21 years into rise and grind, I will tell you, is destructive, right?
Right.
But that world we live in, yes, by all means, where you can resist it, the need to rise and grind, the
Right.
need to be Instagram perfect, the need to have a home magazine worthy house. Like there are aspects of this that you can resist. But the
Yes.
fundamental baseline stress for everybody is just high.
Right. I saw a meme recently. It asked the question, it said, instead of asking, have I worked long enough to deserve rest? Have
Yeah.
I rested long
Long
enough
enough.
to work at my best? Right.
Right.
Like to
Well, and
reverse that question because we
it,
don't ask that question anymore.
but a lot of times you can't,
Right. It's not
right?
possible.
It's not possible, right? Like we just some of this is less instructive of like the 5 simple ways to make an easier life, which just becomes another thing to do. Prep your
Right.
meals ahead of time. Now you've given me a chore, right? Like,
Yes.
sorry, meal prep is my weird like. I don't want to think about it. Anyways, so it's like some of this is less like do this, do that, and for us to just be aware that like part of what feeds into this scene with the golden calf is these are people who are stressed out of their minds, and they make a really bad decision. And what they do is really bad. What they do is idolatry. I'm not taking that away, right? And like God gets pretty upset at them, in part because this time it's a little bit more of an own goal, right? But they are stressed out, and they make a bad decision. We are all stressed out. And so some of this is just like, be aware that like when you are not playing at your best, this is where the temptations can sneak in. Right?
This is where the poor decision making happens.
I mean, this is often goes, and we've talked about this before too, but like this often goes to the heart of like, if you look at a clergy person who has major misconduct, one of the things you often see, this isn't always true, but is often true, they also don't have a robust self-care infrastructure.
Right.
Right.
They do not have a good Sabbath routine. They do not have a good self
They
care.
don't have friends to vent to. They don't seek the help of colleagues.
Right.
Right. And so when you are, let your stress, to the degree that you can control it. Again, you can't always, but to the degree you can control it. If you are not, that is often where those like really bad temptations begin to seem really logical. And so, we have an unsatisfying. I guess I'm supposed to, rail about how idolatrous a culture we are, and I don't disagree with that actually. I am just saying that like some of what this is no one's playing, playing with a full deck here.
Yeah. And it doesn't take much you can even have a normalized level of stress that you can handle. But then when you reach that one extra stressor, you add
Yeah.
in that one extra change. When Moses doesn't come back in the timeline you thought Moses was going to come back on, something happens that throws off your routine, whatever it is. It's how you're able to react to that, how you're able to handle that.
Yeah.
According to how, where's your baseline level of stress? Does it start down here, or is it already through the roof?
Right. And a lot of people are through the roof.
Right.
And certainly the Hebrews there in the desert are through the roof. And you know, it it's tough. It is just tough out there.
Hmm. And this is how you get that, like, mommy needs a glass of wine culture,
Oh
which is
God,
actually just
yeah,
not very
wine. Yeah,
healthy.
no, wine
it's,
moms.
it's it's not actually very funny if you think
No,
about it,
it's
because
it's
the fact
not.
that
It's
they need to
just
resort to wine is not
well, but like that,
healthy.
right? Like I'm not saying this, but like again, like this is where, like I don't know what everyone can define what their appropriate level of alcohol in their life is,
Right.
and
Yeah.
I just happen to have alcoholics in my family, and look, pretty much everyone
Same.
knows. I mean,
Right.
also this is America. Pretty much everyone knows an alcoholic,
Yeah.
right? But like that
But the
is,
fact that we make fun of, like, oh, it's fine, just
haha,
have a glass of wine. Yeah, actually, no. Maybe we just make the workload lighter on moms so that we
right,
don't,
and
have to resort to this ridiculous stereotype.
so if there is like, what can we do here? But what we can do is a couple of things, right? As we talk about a lot, like recognize that not all the things you stress yourself out with are necessary.
Yes.
And so the necessary stuff is stressful enough.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe resist the algorithms, resist them, block them out, right? This is like, I cut Facebook essentially out of my life. And I don't follow people I know on Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
And I usually mostly use Twitter for AP and RNS. It's like my like news, and I follow like games journalism and criticism, and like it's just a news feed for me. It's not a like I do
It's
not.
not social media. It's
It's
just a
not.
news feed
It's just a
in
news
your
feed.
book.
Like I
Yeah.
do not look at, and this like I miss things in people's lives, but I do not look at the pictures my friends post on anything. I don't, or my acquaintances, or like that person at a conference I met once. Like I don't. I went cold turkey in 2015 and never looked back. Um, and like so there are like things we can resist, but I think you bring up that other point of like also help each other.
Right. Bear one another's burdens. It's almost like there was some scriptures about this.
I know, right,
Hey,
right, but like
maybe we can help one another out, not just with the expectation part, but with, actually being genuine community for one another.
because sometimes the stress is not avoidable, right?
Right.
Wine mom memes I think hit a particular zenith during the lockdown, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
And now they're mom math or dad math memes,
yeah,
but still, it's that,
but like
maybe share the load,
let's
right?
share the load,
Maybe.
because if you are, as I was, right, like I wasn't a mom, but I was a parent, trapped at home in the lockdown with a 5-year-old,
Mm-hmm.
and like and we're used to having 8 to 12 hours apart, and now we don't have that, and like those are like that's real. That's not artificially manufactured stress.
Right. It's real stress.
That's real stress. And so now that like we're back in a world where we can interact in person, um, we have those opportunities to, if you have capacity to share, find someone who doesn't and help them,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, and so that maybe we can all live in a less stressed world. And in a less stressed world is a world that has a better opportunity to see God and
Absolutely.
not try to replace God with whatever solves your problem or feels like, there's a rephrase, whatever feels like
Feels like
it
solves
solves
your
your problem.
problem.
And this is
Mm-hmm.
like, in some ways, what we've been circling around with this is just Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like the spiritual and fulfillment stuff is at the top of this hierarchy, right? But if you're stressed out about being starving,
Right.
you're going to have a hard time thinking about God.
Mm-hmm.
If you are stressed out because the screaming 5-year-old doesn't let you poop in peace, it's just harder to see God.
Yes.
Right? And like, it's just a reality, right? Like, it's just real. Right?
So maybe let's all start with a lower baseline of stress.
Right.
So that we can,
poop in peace. No, see God. See God. Right. The goal is to see God. Because, again, and so some of that is, resist the stress. Like, don't add to it. Right? This is like, God bless anyone who manages to get out Christmas cards. I'm never going to do it. And I don't even worry about it. Right? Advent's such a busy season for us. I'm just like, nah. Well, that's cool. I put them in my fridge, and I like looking, I like them as much as the next people. I'm just not going to worry about that. It's just never going to happen. I'm okay. I have a friend of mine. She has a whole, like, customer relationship management software that she uses. She uses, like, CRM software to manage her Christmas list. It's amazing. It is amazing. Wow. It's astounding. I'm deeply impressed by it. I also know that I'm never going to do it. And that doesn't make her better than me. This is where she's chosen to invest her time, and she seems to get a lot out of it. Like, right. I'm not mocking her for this. It's actually kind of like deeply awesome. I'm never going to do that. That's a stressor I don't need in my life. Because for me personally, I've invested my holiday time in making your holidays happen. And so I just don't have it. Right. But like
life of a pastor. It's what we do.
Right. But anyways, I can go on and on about this, but like, I didn't want another piece out there where we just rail against idolatry.
Right.
And not unpack the very, like, not just like people bad, but like,
but the very real rat race that we're all in that hamster wheel. So maybe how do we get off of that hamster wheel?
Or how do we make it all a little bit bearable? Or how do we just wreck it? Like, even just like, not to sound like a new age guru, but the mindfulness, right? Like, my life makes my base stress level a 7. Right. This is going to make resisting temptation harder for me. Even that's its own kind of victory. Mm-hmm. And certainly we have God's love and support, but I don't want to make that just like, and then you're going to feel good. Maybe not. Maybe God's love and support is like, you have people who you can ask for help.
Right.
Anyways, we're going to be back on the other side of the break with How to Restart a Church, where we're going to look at a project done by the Associated Press about people around the growing trend of people around the world claiming no religion, or what often gets referred to as the nuns. N-O-N-E-S. Not
N-U-N-S. Different kind of nun.
That is not on. Being an N-U-N-S is not on the rise. Being an N-O-N-E-S is. We'll be right back. And we're back with our segment we call How to Restart a Church, which is sometimes about like methodologies, and sometimes it is about like, what is the state of the world that we are trying to rebuild a thing called church in? And so the Associated Press, actually in partnership with the Lilly Foundation, did this really interesting series of articles from their projects department called The Nuns, N-O-N-E-S. And it looks at the growing number of people worldwide who are claiming no faith. And we've talked a lot about the growth of NUNESs in the United States and a little bit in Western Europe. But they took a much broader approach and looked at folks in Italy, in the United States, but also in South America, in the Middle East,
in India,
in Japan, and in Israel.
Yes.
And so it was this really kind of, and it was very, qualitative, right? So it's a lot of interviews, right? of individuals, and who they talk to is a little bit self-selecting, right? Because they're talking to people who are the kind of people they talk to is kind of one of two categories, like religious leaders reacting to or three people: religious leaders reacting to the growth of nuns, academics talking about a specific context, or the nuns themselves
Right.
from around the world. And so again, like this is by no means like they're not trying to do a broad sweeping series of articles about modern religiosity, but it is looking at the experience of nuns. And one of the things that stood out to me across all of these contexts is the number of people who felt like becoming a nun was liberative for them, that they felt set free and found a healthier version of themselves and a healthier version of community when they stepped outside of a world of faith. And
Yes.
that there was particularly in the South American, looking at Argentina and Uruguay, that was particularly in there, but there was also like it was a strain that wove through it. And for me, thinking about this not as a nun, right? I am a theist, not an atheist. It's not, again, like maybe the theme of this whole podcast is like, we're not judging the people who are living this, right? Like what the generations of what we as the church have done wrong that has led to a thing where, there was this interview, many of the interviews had this tone of, I stepped outside of my faith and I felt better about myself.
Right. Or I experienced God in more meaningful ways on a surfboard than I did in my synagogue, temple, church, whatever the fill in the blank was.
Or I felt,
and
or
even
I felt
in
more,
all of the diverse backgrounds that they were coming from.
and or I felt genuine community.
Yes.
Now that I am outside of a religious context. Like that really stood out to me as something that makes me deeply sad, not for them, but for us.
Yes.
That we, in some ways, we did that, right?
Right.
Because here's the thing that we know as Christians. We know that the thing they're experiencing is the Holy Spirit.
Yes.
Right? That's the love of
on
God.
a surfboard in yoga class when you're meditating, whatever that is.
Contemplating aliens in a field in Argentina, a real thing in this story, right? And
right.
It sounds ridiculous, but all
aliens / angels.
All belief systems sound ridiculous when it's not your belief system, and so I'm not mocking it, right? Like they found genuine community, which we know is the love of God,
right?
And they found it by giving up on Christianity or whatever religion in Argentina and Uruguay.
Or the bureaucracy of the organization.
Well, but even the
their organized religion.
And they talk, there was a strong or the bless it both in, this came up both in in the Middle East and in the Indian context of people who are having to hide the fact that they are nuns. There's a truly one of the most painful ones was an interview with a guy unnamed in Nigeria, because in Nigeria is evenly split Christian and Muslim, and it's very territorial. To the north is Muslim, and to the south is Christian. And in the Muslim north, to be a nun is dangerous, right? And this was true across the kind of interviews in the Middle East as well. I know that Nigeria is in Africa, but in the Middle East as well, and in India.
And in India, where it's very bureaucratic, you have to be it's on your birth certificate.
Yeah, it's on your birth certificate, right? Like this guy could not get Hindu taken off his birth.
Right. You are born into your religion, and you stay that.
you stay that, and they literally don't have a tick box for no religion. Right. Like you can tick the box to be Hindu or Muslim or Christian or Jain or whatever. Right. Mm-hmm. But there's no box for none.
for none of the above.
Right?
You have
Like,
to pick one.
you
And if
have
you
to pick
don't,
one.
your paperwork doesn't go through, you don't get, whatever bureaucratic red tape you get stuck up in because you can't literally get through.
But even for all these folks, they're still choosing no religion.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so I
Or
just
not practicing religion. They'll
right.
be it on paper, but they won't practice
Right. Or
whatever that
like
is.
or they are experiencing something, and we'll get to that's the other theme I see in this. Like they experiencing something deeply spiritual, but definitely don't want to call it organized Christianity. Or,
Right.
or organized
Organized
Islam
religion at all.
or organized religion at all. And
Yes.
and I feel deeply convicted by that. Because the thing I don't want to, I don't want to do is I don't want to move to judgment of that person,
Right.
right? Similar way that we're not judging the Hebrews, right? Like this came out of the fact that the conditions within the religion were, in a lot of cases, it's our
Right.
religion,
Yes.
it's Christianity. They are not
We need to
experiencing.
own that.
They are not experiencing the goodness of God. They are experiencing judgment, rejection, or the judgment
hypocrisy.
of hypocrisy,
Yes.
or the judgment of others. I can't remember which country this was in. There was some guy, maybe this was Italy, but it was like, yeah, it was Italy. So like, it was like, yeah, the priest would treat you on humility, and I'm like literally leaning against a gold column.
That was Argentina.
Was that Argentina?
That was Argentina.
Clearly
that was the Pope's literal home country.
Yeah.
He was like listening in the Vatican to a sermon on humility, leaning against a goalpost bigger than his apartment.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that stood out to me too.
So clearly we know the one that stuck with me the most was Argentina and Uruguay.
Right.
Because, holy cow. But also because that's the one that, like, speaks, I think, most directly to a Christian context, right? Like, It is interesting for me to hear about the struggles in a certain stripe of Muslim country or in Hindu country, but like that's a context I can't. It's not my context, right? Like, in Uruguay and also in Italy, it was interesting. It was like, I mean, I'm Catholic, but like,
but are you really?
No, but like, I'm Catholic, but I'm not Christian. And this doesn't mean like Catholics aren't Christians. It's like, it's important for me as like a cultural thing,
right,
to like have some interface with this. And like 60%
the cultural part was true in like Israel too. I mean, it was very much like you're Jewish as a culture, but not as a religion, right? This is your culture. This is your language. This is your
history, your land,
your history.
Yeah,
but not actually practicing.
Yeah, but I don't believe in a God, right?
Right.
And so I think this is like, that was the other piece of this, of the growth of nuns versus just talking about a growth of atheism, right? Because often within this broader perspective of nuns, it is finding a level of involvement in something that has a spiritual weight to it without feeling like it's a box. Think about the article from Japan was that, like, apparently this works well in Japan for a lot of things, is like if you have a collectible, people will go around, this is the nation that invented Pokemon. Okay?
Right.
So, like, it works. And so the temples have these, and there's some pictures in the article. They're really beautiful. These, like, beautiful stamps. And you can go around the temples and you can collect the stamps and you can experience the vibes of the temple. And, like, people are finding calmness and relaxation and peace.
But it's the equivalent of Instagram coffee shops.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It that made me think instantly of, like, because they are Instagrammable pictures of these collectible, Goshuin, the stamps that you can get in the Shinto shrines. But it's just it's creating that collection. It's the Pokemon cards. It's got to catch them all, right?
It's got to catch them all. But they interview the people like, yeah, I really like going to them. I don't really think of it as a spiritual thing, but I feel good when I'm there, or like,
and I get to get out of the rat race for a little while and like have this mindfulness, time where I step aside for me. It's self-care.
Yeah. And And I look at that and go, again, like, and so then that's the opportunity, right? If we talk
Mm-hmm.
about the like, especially the South America and the Italian one, like really convicting for me of like, man, we need to think about how the world we have created, right? That if people are leaving the faith, we got to think about why are they doing that, right? And then
Right.
it's what we talked about with that book non-verts, right? That
Right.
and this plays out the ideas of non-version. Like sometimes it is we didn't make them care, right? Like
Right.
we didn't show this to be life changing. So
Right.
it's like yeah. I mean, I could go to Christmas service and it's not the American version. Like I go
Right.
to Christmas service, it's nice.
It's nice, or I'll go with my mom when she comes to visit
Right?
or
Like,
whatever.
I'm
But
not mad about it, but like, it's just not valuable to me, right? And so that's
right.
a missed opportunity. But also, there is the like, this, judgmental fear of hell, fear and guilt based rejection
Mm-hmm.
of people, the hypocrisy of grandeur in the midst of poverty.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all stuff we did.
Right.
We did that, and are doing it.
And I think we're also the other piece that we start to do is you'll start to notice people preaching from a scarcity mindset of
Yeah.
make sure you're bringing your friends or else we're not going to be able to whatever. I recently spoke with someone who she said, "Well, I would take my friends to church except that the only thing I ever hear my pastor preach about is how I should bring people to church. And why would I bring them to church to hear that message?"
Yeah, right.
I'm like, this is a very terrible cycle to get into, friends. Like,
well,
maybe we should try something different.
it's the easiest fundraising tactic in the book that doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like fundraising 101 is don't appear desperate.
Right.
People like let's get to
Why would you give to something that's on fire?
to a sinking ship. Right?
Yeah.
Especially if you're not sure that ship is valuable. Right? What we do what is inviting is a sense that this thing is vibrant and valuable.
Yes.
Right? And so that is the like I deeply dislike the phrase the church is dying. The church, capital C, cannot die or God is dead. Right? Like that's the thing, friends, right?
Right.
Not to quote Nietzsche for a second, right? But like it's just always dangerous. Nietzsche, not a great guy. But
Eh.
like if we believe the church is dying, then we are saying God is dead. Right? An individual local church may be dying, denominations may be dying, the construction of church as we know it may be dying. But the gathering of people inspired and connected by the Holy Spirit and saved by Christ can't die because
Right.
God can't die. Right?
And so maybe we need to change our mindset to, the church as we know it may be dying, but maybe that's not a bad thing, friends. Like
Well,
maybe we need
yeah.
church to go through this revolution, to go through this change, so that we can start being relevant in the lives of people so that they realize that they can find God in our community of the church, capital C. I'm not saying, our denomination or whatever, but maybe we need to become more relevant again and reach those nuns in the way that they're
Yeah.
seeking.
What else? Yeah, and I think that to that point, this is I think a thread that I'm not sure I was expecting. That's coming out in a lot of the things that we're looking at,
Mm-hmm.
or even in our experience at Union, right? At Union Coffee Shop,
Mm-hmm.
the that different levels of engagement,
Yes.
that like you think of it as like a funnel,
Yes.
right? And you have to have something at a broad end of the funnel. And maybe at the end of that funnel is things like leader in the church,
Right.
or attends every
Membership
Sunday,
vows
membership
and
vows,
whatever you want to call it.
right?
Right.
Yeah, but like at the widest end of that funnel, and this is where like Union Coffee Shop to me connects well with the Shinto temples,
Mm-hmm.
in the Japanese part of the story. By the way, if you're looking for that, in whatever version, whatever platform you're on, it's in the show notes.
Yeah.
We'll have a link to it. It took me a while. I'm a very slow reader. It took me a while to read them, but they're really interesting.
They are.
But like the Shinto temple is that really wide end, offers that really wide end of the funnel of just like go, place, beautiful, nice environment. Cool, that
Get
was
your
nice.
stamp.
Get your
Yep.
stamp. And
Get your stamp.
that all felt good. Nice
Yeah.
little dopamine release, on with my day. But it can also be like prayer or interaction with a priest or support the festivals or whatever, right? You have these different onboarding points that make offer you the intent for more,
Yes.
but also
Don't expect it.
don't expect it, right?
Don't
There's like
expect it up front.
or even at all, right? Well,
Right.
certainly the Shinto temple, even at all, and that's
Right.
I don't know. I mean, that's the question that I wrestle with in a lot of these conversations around nuns and non-version. Because on one hand, I want people to care, right? I want this thing that we are doing to be valuable and life-changing because I know it can be. And I
Because it
know,
matters.
because it matters. And I know that the world, I believe, I know in my soul, right? You listening to me may disagree with me, but this is what I know from my perspective, right? That like this thing that we're doing here, when done well, can be life changing. And so I want people to care about that. But also, I recognize that even for me, like I am not a nun, but I a lot of the Christian experience bounces off me too. And I had, I find my way to faith through a really weird real faith through a really weird part of the funnel. It was history of religion in ancient Israel, as taught by Donald C. Pulaski, at a secular college, as an estate, the College of William and Mary, which is a secular state university in the, Virginia, in the state of Virginia, right? And because I finally found other people on my end of the funnel that were like way too intellectual about all of this and still found God. And I went,
Right.
oh, okay. Like, and so, I have a deep love. I got here in part because of scripture as historical document,
Yes.
as actual.
That really is another part that is a thread that I found through all of those articles was that secular, just being able to not check your brain at the door.
Yeah. Yeah.
We so often, so many times, we just, say, well, you have to just accept this on faith. Well, no, you also get to think about things critically. You can look at the Bible as a critical document, right?
Well,
You can
and
look at it.
And you can be unsure about it.
Yes.
Right.
And that there's more than one way to look at it.
Right. And so that's what I mean. Like, I think about, again, I guess this is the episode in which we have absolutely no answers for anything. What a show! What a show we have made. But like, these are huge questions. The question of idolatry and the problems in the modern world, and like the both the historical conditions that create this era of non-version, and the what do we do about it, right? Because to me, it's not double down. It's not like further reject the modern world,
Right.
or just yell about just yell about how idolatrous people are and how busted the world are. Because the truth is, there's like a heck of a lot of very ethical nuns who are finding spiritual and ethical growth
And
outside
genuine community
outside of the church. And it's not like, I also find genuine community outside the church. I would feel even more genuine community if my Astros were better. Then I could join in with the collective joy of a city at the moment we're joining in collective sorrow. When you're listening to this, it's I guess this comes out Tuesday evening. And so it's blessedly we have a day off today. So it can't get any worse. Right now we're working really hard and getting swept by the Rangers. But like, joking aside, like I also can find genuine community in the secular side of my life. We have ceded ground, and it is a self-own. This is a problem of our own making. If folks are turning away from organized religion, we can't assume that those people are uniquely bad.
Right.
really bad way to. God, this is just I'm just quoting Kanye today. This is just a bad way to start a conversation.
That's the. It's not me. It's you.
That's not me. It's you.
It's
Trust
not
me.
me. It's you.
Trust me.
That's not true.
I ran a church where 150 people told me, and then in my first 9 months there, I know well that it's not me. It's you.
Right.
And so we are not. We can't approach people like that.
Right.
They left for a reason.
So maybe we need to look internally and see what it was that was either driving them out or just not attracting them to begin with.
And then, and the other piece is like, how do we broaden the funnel, right?
Yes.
Like, how do we, without compromising what we believe, right? There's a lot of ways to drive up youth group numbers if you have absolutely no morals. And so
don't do those. We are not advocating for that.
We are not or, I would do great if we're talking about redeveloping this property. If we put a casino on site, holy cow, right? Holy cow.
Right by Hobby Airport?
Right by Hobby Airport, right? Like,
yeah.
So no. And so without compromising who we are, right? How do we
increase the funnel?
Increase
How do we make easier points of engagement for people to start dipping their toes into coming back into this world that we have created?
And letting it be a little less expectation filled.
Yes.
Right? Oh, it's okay. You're going to get saved eventually. Chill out. Right? Like, I think we're in a moment, and maybe we've always been there, but those voices are more prominent, of let us figure this out. And maybe, I can easily imagine a world where it's like, oh, this is a fun environment. Oh, I feel something different here. Oh, what causes me to feel this different? And then working your way down the funnel. Working your way through it and wanting that more depth and seeing that a little bit of depth brought this much. What if more depth? But I think for us to be able to earn the right to do that, the judgmental stuff, I struggle with this, right? Because we want expectations.
Right.
But also, the world might have noticed that we are not as consistently loving as we should be. And that is objectively a problem, right? Like, I think about, Paul escapes from jail. Paul could have escaped from jail and doesn't. Is that Paul and Barnabas or Paul and Silas? Is that Paul and Silas? Silas. Yeah. There we go. So Paul and Silas, they do not, yell at their jailer for being a Roman government official and working for the evil empire. They just love him and, invite his whole family into something. Right?
And it works.
And it works.
And it works.
We don't hear a lot of Paul, this is one that comes up a lot in my work around communications consulting, but Paul in the Areopagus, right? He doesn't say, y'all are so dumb. He says, you like this stuff. Let me invite you into something that maybe you'll like too. Yes. Right? There's not Paul gets much more rad at the Corinthians than he does and he should. Or the Galatians, right? Paul gets mad at people, but often it's the people on the inside who are not doing what they should do.
Right.
So
if Paul were writing letters today, would your church be getting a letter, friends?
Yeah,
maybe that's the question we need to ask.
Yeah.
We'd all be getting a letter.
Yeah, I'm about to restart, redo a study I wrote some years ago on Revelation called Sure Looks Like the End Times. It's about to become our Tuesday morning Bible study for a few weeks. And what you forget is the opener of that is John's letter to a whole bunch of churches. One of the things that we did while we were in Turkey was we're in the town we got one of those that got one of those mentions. But that is, a lot of us need a corrective. And so I invite y'all to read, anyone who's listening to this, read this read this series of articles. They're really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But my hope is that we can approach this era of non-version by thinking to ourselves, and I gotta, we've got to do, we as this church, we've got to do this as much as anybody. Like, why are people leaving? Why aren't people coming in? Why aren't people showing up? And not adopt because they're bad sinners and they just want to keep sinning. Because truth is, people want spiritual fulfillment. A lot of these nuns are finding a level of spiritual fulfillment. They're not.
We are all seeking spiritual fulfillment, right? Like we've said it before. I think we're not a body that has a soul. I think we are a soul. You have a body, right? You are seeking. Everyone is seeking the divine, whether they know it or not, right?
The level of like spirituality in some of these nuns is
incredible.
It's incredible. And so this is not a moment where people are saying no to the mystical.
Right.
Seems to be an era where people are saying no to the overly organized and overly judgmental.
Yes.
And the overly gold
bureaucratic.
Overly bureaucratic.
Overly hypocritical.
Don't talk to me about that. I spent my Saturday dealing with church paperwork.
Oh, dear.
And before I say something that gets me fired, we're going to bring this in for a landing.
It's like good time to stop.
Good time to stop here. On that note, it's time to end. Thank you so much for joining us. Good night. If you have thoughts you would like to share it with us and you'd like to hear read on air, we would love to make more voices a part of this show. You can email at us at thegoodnessofgodpod@gmail.com. That is thegoodnessofgodpod@gmail.com. This show is a product of the Servants Now Media Lab at Servants of Christ United Methodist Parish and is brought to you by an Innovators Grant by the Texas Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church. If you want to find out more about what we've got going on here at the parish or here in the Media Lab, just go to Servants Now on everything. TikTok, not Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, the web at servantsnow.org. We try to have stuff. If you have a week where you want just the essay, great. If you listen to the audio and want video, great. It's all over the place. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord. We'll see you next week.